Hi, everybody. It's it's one half of your hosts today, Hannah Vaughn, and Ethan is taking the night off. And I brought a special guest with us today. If you already know him, that's cool. If you don't, then I don't know. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Thomas Westbrook. I have a show called Holy Kool-Aid, and I think I brought some of my audience over. So if you saw a notification, then say hi in the chat. And and while you're here, subscribe to this show because Hannah puts out a show every week, and it's a lot of fun. Her and Ethan talk about dating and relationships and stuff from an atheist perspective, and I think you guys will love it because they have a lot of like fun energy and stuff, and it's always just a relaxed, chill show.
And we're not exclusively an atheist show. While Ethan and I are both atheists, so we're not excluding the rest of you, but we do bring our perspective to the table here and there. Tonight we're not taking calls, just because that's a little bit complicated. We're actually not even in our regular studio in Austin right now. The two of us are actually on like a mini vacation in New Orleans. So if sirens start to happen, there's nothing I can do about that. So I apologize in advance. But today's topic is going to be about what atheists want in a relationship. Disclaimer, we are not speaking for all atheists. I thought it would be really fun to have Thomas on as an ex-Christian who is now an atheist, and to compare his thoughts or his standards and his values and what he wanted from a relationship, and to compare them to what they look like now. I also want to, while we're not taking calls, I hope you guys feel encouraged to be very active in the chat and chime in if you relate to certain things, or if you want to bring your perspective to what you want in a relationship as a religious person or as an atheist. Because I feel like those really change when something's so when something's so important to you changes as well, or doesn't change for that matter. I think religion and spirituality play a big role in how you navigate the world, including the people you choose or look for in relationships. I mean, it plays a big role in our life. So I thought that would be cool to talk about. Do you want to add anything, or you want to dive in?
Let's dive in. Let's get to some of these questions because, when we were talking about this a little bit before the show, and I got to thinking about it, and I was like, man, the stuff, because I remember writing out a list of things that I was looking for in like the perfect woman when I was a Christian. And I don't know if I wish I still had the list, but I think I got rid of it when I moved to Thailand. But I did find it after becoming an atheist. And it was just all of these things, like she has to put Jesus first in her life. And like, even then I was still a little bit like, I was like,
well, we'll get into that.
Yeah, I had phases of like ultra conservative, more liberal Christian, atheist, yada yada. But we'll get into it more, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I guess like the first question I have for you is, how have your standards changed as opposed to when you were Christian and now that you're an atheist? Have they changed?
Yes.
Would you say drastically, or I mean, you mentioned that they kind of waxed and waned.
Yeah, and as I talk about this stuff, I am curious. I do want to hear you guys' feedback in the chat as like, if you were religious before and then became an atheist, what were the big things that changed in terms of what you looked for and what your standards were? But there were definitely things that when I was super religious, there were huge deal breakers. There were things that were major red flags. I wanted a girl who would go to church regularly. I wanted a girl who put Jesus first in her life, who was willing to raise our kids, in a Christian home, like under the Bible and stuff. But also even just in terms of the things that I was comfortable with a partner doing. I've had, since I came out of my faith, I've had some relationships where the girls that I've dated have had a background or a history in like camming or things like that. And it wasn't really as big of a deal to me as when I was like super religious and super Christian, whereas that would have been like a huge, this is a harlot and a woman of the night and we can't have anything like that. And now I have more of a approach of like sex work is work too. And obviously there's some things that in a relationship I am still not comfortable with. Like, I don't know that I could date someone who was like a prostitute. I like, just in terms of like personal safety and risks, and I'd constantly be worrying and stuff. But in terms of, you know, hey, this is someone who, you know, when I was a Christian, I wanted someone who was a virgin until the wedding night. And that's definitely something that I don't look for anymore in a relationship.
Well, that's good. Specifically with the Christian faith, there is this dynamic within like men and women in the household, and man is the head of the household and the woman is submissive. Was a submissive woman something that would have been important to you? Or did that not really matter? I mean, did you always kind of feel like it was equal?
So this is actually hard, because my idea of like the perfect woman or the ideal relationship changed so many times, not just from like Christian to atheist, but even like while I was a Christian. Before I ever became an atheist, I kind of went from ultra conservative Christian, well, you know, obviously the man is supposed to be the head of the household and stuff, and like take a leadership role. And I still think that, like, you know, there is a value to being, you know, strong and decisive and a leader and stuff like that, but not in a sense of like, you know, and the woman is kind of like not an equal partner. And, you know, I see like strength and courage and stuff, not just as male traits,
not
exclusively.
Like a masculine
and
thing. Okay.
I didn't really see them as exclusively male traits before, but it was I don't know, I think when I was Christian, there was a point when I kind of wanted to be like, well, yes, of course, what I say goes all the time, and I am the leader, and she has to like submit and listen to me, and I make the final decision and stuff when I was younger. And then I kind of hit a phase where I was like, okay, we're a partnership, we're a team, we discuss this stuff together, but we're still trying to do the best thing in order to like put God first in the relationship, and, you know, seek out what is the best Christian decision to make.
I don't want to bring your family too much into this, but I feel like from what I've witnessed, your upbringing has a lot to do with that, because it seems like your family doesn't really have that kind of like stereotypical Christian power dynamic. It seems very like equal, and I don't want to say like respectful, because it's like, oh, if there's like a sub and a dom kind of dynamic, not that it's sexual, but like that's not respectful, because sometimes that works in relationships. But I feel like they seem very...
Yeah, well, it's like you have a verse in Genesis where it says that, you know, that the woman is supposed to submit to her husband. I think it's in Genesis. Maybe it's something Paul said. And it says that the husband will rule over her. And it has a very like, not in a kind of kinky, you know, whips and chains kind of way, but in a like, women very much throughout the Old Testament are treated as property. You know, when you read through, you know, all of the Old Testament laws, it talks about, you know, if a woman is raped, well, you just have to pay the property damage to her husband or marry her, because now she's of no value because she lost all of her value, and, you know, when her cherry was popped. And so when you think of women in terms of property, it's like, well, you have to rule over your oxen and your donkeys and your sheep and your horses.
And
so why not your women?
That's so wild. We've come such a long way, and like it's I don't see that as much in, I guess, like Western Christianity.
Well,
so
and even like with my parents' relationships, like my mom and dad are best friends. And
they're really cute.
They get along really well. They're still madly in love after almost 40 years or some crazy odd nonsense like that.
A long time.
And so, and I say that with like admiration.
Yeah.
And so if I think that had my dad been kind of an abusive bully, I don't think that they necessarily would have flourished as much. Maybe they'd still be in a relationship, because like my mom might be like afraid of him or something. But I think that
it doesn't seem that way at all.
My parents, their relationship's probably the furthest thing from abusive towards each other. And so it's, you know, it doesn't quite fall in line with that, you know, biblical, he will rule over her, what you would think from that, at least.
Yeah. Okay, so things you're okay with now that you wouldn't be okay with as a Christian. I mean, you talked about you probably wouldn't have dated someone with a sex working past if
Mhm.
you were still Christian.
Mhm.
That's changed now. I mean, for example,
Virgins, like
you thought like I can only date like a virgin if she's
well, but even then though, like I lost my virginity while I was still a Christian.
Oh my God.
And so, but after that happened, I felt terrible. I felt guilty. I was in a Christian fraternity at the time, and I went to like a worship service the next day, and I was literally just in the corner like sobbing because I was like, oh man, like I feel so guilty about this. And the crazy thing is, my dad had always told me that like this is what happens when you lose your virginity. You're giving up something precious and valuable, and so like you're gonna feel horrible remorse, and it's never goes away. And what I learned afterwards and what I realized is that like the guilt and the shame and the feelings of like being a damaged, irreparable damaged goods or whatever, you don't have that feeling outside of religious or indoctrination type of mindsets that are placed on you, because I don't have that feeling now. I don't think that way now, and so and I know a lot of atheists who grew up. I don't think you had like a guilt and shame. You weren't raised in like a Christian background.
No.
And so it's this idea that like, oh, you'll never be able to recover from it. You're going to feel like shame and guilt and stuff. It's like, thanks to religion, thanks to these harmful doctrines that are causing that trauma and, guilt and shameful feelings that you have to work through then. And it causes psychological damage that you can work through, but it's not because you had sex that's there. It's because of the religious baggage that's in your life. Yeah.
I want to point to something in the chat that made me giggle. Where is it? Someone said, I think we lost it, but it said something along the lines of, seems like that Thomas has to be careful with his answers next to Hannah.
Actually, so
do you feel that way? I feel like this is the most professional we've ever behaved in each other's presence. Like, I actually do want to comment on that. This is like, our behavior right now is like really odd. Like, this is so weird. Well, like, we were just like, okay.
We've never been on like a live show like this before. So like normally like we're super let our hair down, goofy and stuff. And now I'm just like, oh crap, the whole world is seeing my relationship in public for the first time. And it's weird because like, okay, so we're in Louisiana right now. We're in New Orleans. Hannah got a week off to because she teaches preschool. And so we're like, hey, where can we go that's super cheap, that's kind of short notice, that's close to Texas? And we're like, New Orleans. So we got like a nice affordable Airbnb and we came out here. The other day we went to the swamp and we're looking at alligators in the bayou, and right there, like in the boat, like in front of us, this guy turns around and he's like, hey, are you that holy Kool-Aid guy? I'm a big fan. And I was like, what? I got recognized here out in the middle of the boonies in the middle of nowhere looking at alligators on a boat.
And then we're all like, we have to behave now.
The second he did that, I was like, oh, gotta behave, gotta act professional and all this stuff. But in terms of relationships, like I've been in abusive relationships in the past. I've dated, an alcoholic and someone whose mental health definitely was taken out on me in a negative way. And I don't feel that with Hannah. So yeah.
I drink a lot, but
not
I know we don't have to go down
unhealthy,
that
no.
Well, thank you for saying that. Okay, so we were talking about things you wouldn't be okay with us.
I drink a lot of coffee.
That's totally coffee. Okay, so things that you're okay with now that you wouldn't be as a Christian. So it was mainly like the sexual background. Was that just kind of the main thing? It's it's funny how lenient you became after you lost your virginity. It's an interesting little double standard there. I just want to point that out.
Well, so I actually, for a while, I still like, I felt really guilty, and I also still was like kind of judgmental. And it was the same way like with drinking. When I was like 17, I was like telling people like, you shouldn't drink. And then I'd like kind of like I'd have a beer, and then I'd be like, oh my God, I'm a hypocrite. Like, who am I to judge other people? And so I think that when it comes to sex, I was like, this is the right way. And there is sort of this, there's a fallacy called the tu quoque fallacy, which means just because you're a hypocrite doesn't mean that you're wrong. right? So I could tell you, hey,
Okay, right.
drinking 2 bottles of vodka in a row is unhealthy for you, and then I do it. And you're like, well, what the hell? You're doing it, so why should I take your advice? That doesn't mean that it's not true. And so like I saw it as kind of like that, where I was like, as a Christian, I'm like, hey, you shouldn't drink and you shouldn't have sex, but like I kind of want to, but I still know that I'm telling you good advice, so I'm gonna still tell it. And they're like, what the hell, hypocrite? Like, would you make like mental pacts with yourself, like, okay, now I'm gonna be a good Christian, like, oh, I drank last week, and like I'm not gonna do that ever again, I'm gonna get back on the right path for Jesus? Not so much with drinking, because like alcohol was never something like, even when I was Christian, I didn't see drinking in and of itself as bad. I wasn't necessarily like drinking, but I saw bad habits that weren't Christian. Like getting drunk as bad, and I very, very rarely got drunk. Like it wasn't until maybe like senior year of college, like after I turned 21, that I like actually would go kind of overboard a little bit. But even then, it was like maybe once a month or once every 2 months or something. Like it wasn't this regular thing, and I kind of got that out of my system. Now I know my limits, and I drink to enjoy it. I like pairing food with alcohol, but I don't like getting messy drunk. Like I speak for yourself. Okay, so is this too similar of a question? Deal breakers versus like checklist items? Like what are other things that would be deal breakers? It's weird because there were other things where I would see maybe a girl who was like completely covered in tattoos, and I wouldn't see tattoos as sinful, but I would see like someone who was dressed very alternative and like kind of being rebellious and stuff. I would see that as maybe I can't bring this girl home to mom and dad. Oh, okay. But now you have brought home girls like that, and that's really interesting. I do sometimes. I take out my tongue ring when we visit your parents. It's like a little bit. I don't want to be like in their face about it. Yeah, but I feel like they'd probably be accepting of it now because you've brought home like kind of alternative looking girls. Yeah, honestly, my parents have only met, I think, like 2 other girls I've dated. And 3rd time's the charm. Okay. But like I've dated other girls. I've always been reluctant, unless I've been in a really long-term relationship, like when I say really, I mean like over a year long. I feel reluctant to introduce someone to my parents unless I really like the girl. Like, because otherwise my parents will think that I'm a slut. Well, so has your parents' approval when it came to dating mattered much to you? Like it seems like it does a little bit. Yeah, I think it still does somewhat. And I know that my parents aren't ever going to fully approve of me because as an atheist, there's going to be hey, we're proud of you that you're not living on the streets. We're proud of you that you're able to take care of yourself and that, you're doing all right. And at the same time, the fact that this show is so successful, and when I say this show, I mean my show, Holy Kool-Aid, the fact that it has such a big reach and my parents have worked their entire lives to spread the gospel, then it's almost like this direct opposition to them. So they're like, they're saving all these souls for Jesus, and then I'm like, you're undoing their work. And so there's a part of that where I'm never going to have their full approval. And so I don't expect to have their full approval with the relationship, but I still love my parents. I still care about them. And so part of me still wants them to say, wow, you did good. Like, we love this girl. Like, she seems awesome. Because I want my parents to love, my partner too. So I like your parents. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what were like the checklist items? Like, she needs to be this, she needs to be that. And what were they then and what are they now, would you say? And don't be afraid of offending me. I'm just gonna... Okay, so I'm gonna list off some things that I looked for, checklist items before as a Christian. While I'm doing that, if you guys want to add in the chat the things that you looked for as you were religious, or if you're still religious, and how that's changed, now that you're an atheist, or if you've always been an atheist, just the things you look for. So for me, I'm trying to remember what I wrote down on this list. I remember that one of the items was it was sort of this kind of obligatory, like I'm writing it down. I'm thinking about like my ideal fantasy girl. And I was like, ooh, she's going to be like gorgeous and have red hair. And like,
oh,
she's going to, be, I had all of these kind of superficial things and, bright eyes and, attractive figure and stuff. But then at the same time, I was kind of like the obligatory, well, yeah, obviously she has to be a Christian. She has to be a good Christian woman. Because that was like, duh, like that was what I was always taught. Like, no matter what, like you just have to make sure that one's there. And then everything else can kind of like fall in line and stuff. And so I had that as like one of the main things at the top of the list, but it wasn't like the things that I was really putting on the list is like what I really wanted. It was like, well, yeah, she has to be Christian first.
There, really quick, I want to say that I saw a question about children, and we are going to get to that, so stick around.
Did I throw children? Damn.
Yeah, I
just got heavy.
I have a question about children later. So
about us or about like how we see children?
Well, we're going to get to that. Okay. So
they're expensive.
Okay. So any other like checklist items? It was basically she had to be beautiful and love Jesus.
Well, yeah, but then there were other things. Like I remember one of the items because like when I was in high school, drinking overseas wasn't nearly as big of a deal. Like drinking underage overseas wasn't as big of a deal as it is here in the US. And so I never really told my parents about this, but they kind of knew. Like they knew that I had like had a beer at my friend Spencer's house. They didn't know that like when I would go out to play pool with my friends, I would like have a beer or two, or I'd, smoke hookah, which I guess in the States is it shisha?
No,
in the States they say hookah. We said shisha overseas.
My parents didn't know that I was getting like blacked out drunk in a field off of like vodka I stole when I was like your age drinking. So,
my age, you mean high school age?
I mean, like it's the age that you were like, oh, I had a beer. So, I went down to the pool halls and had some beers. I was like, I was getting blacked out.
But she actually doesn't get messy drunk that often. But she jokes about it.
I know I do joke about it. I just
but so I had when I was making this list, one of the things that I wrote down was I didn't want a girl who was so uptight of a Christian that she couldn't enjoy a beer, like a super like straight edge, straight laced, like almost like Amish level, like dress in the like the fundamentalist Baptist church level. Like that was kind of a too extreme in the other direction for me, even as a Christian. I wanted a girl that could kind of let her hair down and that would be a partner in crime and a little bit of a rebel and could kind of go out and like push the limits just a bit, but still like loved Jesus. I wanted a girl who wasn't afraid to raise her hands in church. And who who had a good singing voice, which Hannah actually goes to karaoke, so it's kind of funny. But like in my mind, it was like, yeah, she can sing in, like church and stuff.
She can sing.
Yeah, Jesus will love the songs. Tunes.
Isn't afraid to live out loud for Jesus.
Yeah.
My God, I'm sorry for laughing.
Someone who believed in like the power of the Holy Spirit and wasn't just kind of a vanilla Christian, but was like more of a almost like Pentecostal level or like evangelical, who wanted to travel the world, who wasn't afraid of traveling the world and going to places where she could get her hands dirty and stuff, and it wouldn't necessarily be like super cush and
so she can go on missions trips with you.
I didn't want to be a missionary because like my parents did mission stuff. I didn't want to be a missionary. I didn't want to be a teacher. I didn't want to follow in like my parents' footsteps at all. And now I'm like teaching people stuff about religion on the internet, and it's really weird.
Interesting.
But they say the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, and I guess I'm still an apple. I just
have worms. Okay, so this is gonna be tricky. Whether or not I fall in line with these what's it called? Checklist items now. I want you to give me some checklist items now that you
checklist items now and how they've changed from what they were before. Oh, that's a good question. while I'm saying this, I'm kind of curious how many people are watching in the chat.
Okay, I was like, whatever you're doing right now is really distracting me.
No, I wanted to see how many people are tuning in, and it looks like we got 32 watching live. So smash that like button. About half of you guys have hit it. So hit that like button. It helps the YouTube algorithm. So my checklist now compared to what it was before. Good singer. No. That's not a checklist item, but you do have a good voice.
What things are important to you in a relationship now?
So now, after not so much being religious, but having been in an abusive relationship, one of my number one checklist items is someone who is not abusive, who's not
kind of a low bar,
who's not overly needy, who can be independent and is comfortable in their own skin, and who their happiness isn't entirely linked to me and me always being there, who I can actually go and get work done, and I don't have to constantly be taking care of them. Someone who is nurturing and kind and caring and loving. Someone who I connect with physically. Someone who I connect with on an emotional level and I share things in common with. I prefer dating atheists, and skeptics, more importantly, skeptics than atheists, because there are atheists who have some really wild views.
That's true.
Yeah. Someone who likes to travel, who, isn't afraid of getting on planes and ending up in a third world country, and being spontaneous.
Spontaneously ending up in a third world country?
Well, just, being like,
how the fuck did I get here?
No, just being able to like spontaneously move and go somewhere and like live somewhere else. And Hannah moved from California to Austin after we were dating for like
that will follow
a year.
You. It sounds like now you value an individual more rather than a relationship with
someone who's
Christ.
more independent. Intelligence is really key for me. I tend to be more of a sapiosexual. So it wasn't just about like, hey, putting God first and following the Bible and dogmatically like worshiping and going where, scripture led. It was more about like, hey, this person thinks for themselves. They have their own mind and their own ideas and their own hopes and dreams and goals and ambitions. I love someone who's ambitious. It's some of it was the same, but there's definitely things that have changed.
Okay. Someone said, I hope Hannah's taking notes. I like winked at that and then I realized people don't know what I'm winking for. It's a weird habit I have now. And I see something funny, I'm like, yeah. We kind of touched on this a little bit. Your views on sex then versus now. Is there anything you want to elaborate on that you didn't really touch on before? I mean, I know it changes drastically when you're Christian.
Probably one of my biggest things.
Thank you, Kaitlyn Beyond, for your super chat. I want to read that really quick. How do you think, if at all, your relationship would have been if you had met while Thomas was still a Christian? Let's remember that because I think about that all the time. Yeah. We're going to add that to our little list so we make sure we don't miss it because that's like a really, really good question. Okay. So back to what you were saying, views on sex versus now.
Yeah.
It changes a lot.
My approach towards LGBT people was very, very different. Very different. And that was more learned than anything else because I had, I basically was told like, it's an abomination. It's not healthy. It's not good. God doesn't want it. I'm going to tilt the mic a little bit away so that you guys can't hear that siren in the background.
I know someone's car just got bumped.
It's the nature of big cities.
Yeah.
But yeah, my mindset on LGBT stuff was like, I hadn't really met any gay people. I was afraid that like if a guy was gay, no matter what, they were going to hit on me, and that gay guys just hit on every single dude, and I was terrified that what if they hit on me and they want to have sex with me or something? Even like girls who were gay, I kind of saw it as weird, and I wasn't as grossed out by it, but there was like a certain amount of like disgust over just like all gay stuff, which I don't really feel anymore. Like I definitely am more into girls, but I'm much more accepting now of different lifestyles and different, sexual orientations and stuff. And I think in terms of living together before marriage, shacking up, never would have flown while I was a Christian. I even after I became an atheist and I was like living with a partner, I was very reluctant to tell my parents. And the only way that they were really able to like handle it at the time was because like it was someone I was engaged to. And my parents literally told me that, well, in our mind, you know, you're engaged to this girl and we see it as you're already married to her, because in our mind, when you have sex with someone, that's when like in God's eyes, you're married to that person now.
So we're married.
I guess so. In the Lord's eyes, whatever that means.
Right. So do you want to talk about children?
Sure. What about them?
Okay.
I should probably preface this by saying I think children are wonderful and beautiful and they are precious and I don't hate children. But
okay, so like specifically what I want to know is like how when you were a Christian was getting married and then having children, like the milestone expectations for you.
For me, no. For me, I was weird in that I was always the Christian, because you have to realize like I wasn't just a typical Christian. I grew up overseas. And so I wanted to travel, I wanted to explore, I wanted to change the world. And I saw kids as a potential hindrance to that goal and that objective, because it would have been this huge, like, oh, I have to take care of kids and I've got to, you know, put all the effort and the time. Because if I'm going to be a dad, I'm not going to half-ass it. I'm going to go wholeheartedly into it. And so the thought of starting a family and raising kids, I saw it more as a prison. And it was like the white picket fence it was a prison wall, not an ideal dream.
So that did not appeal to you.
And I did eventually, because it was sort of like, that's what you do. You get married, you have kids, yada, yada. But I sort of wanted to wait until I was like late 30s, or at least in my 30s, before I like even kind of considered having children. So, and that hasn't really changed a whole lot, because like I'm not an antinatalist. I'm not opposed to having kids. I'm not opposed to it. And I kind of would like to raise kids. I think I'd be a good dad.
But you're not in a hurry.
I'm not in a hurry. And it's one of those things where it's like, if I had a kid when I was late high school or like early college, or even like right after I got married, like I would have felt trapped. I would have, you know, I don't know if I would have been prepared. Not that anyone ever really is, but you know, you learn on the fly, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's so many things that I've been able to throw myself wholeheartedly into and accomplish that I don't think I could have if I was only able to dedicate a fourth of the time that I have been able to, or at least it would have taken me longer. That's not to say that people with kids can't be incredibly productive. And like, I admire the shit out of people.
It is hard though. It is.
Have a family and are able to like use their time very efficiently and effectively and still be there for their family. Like that's hard to do, and more power to you if you can. But now I'm looking at it and I'm like, I want to make sure that like I have all my ducks in a row and I got some savings and I've done and gone to and visited and, you know, knocked all the things off my bucket list that are going to be more difficult when I have kids, that I don't want to wait until I'm like 50 or 60 and they move out of the house to do, you know, because it's a lot harder to be like, hey, let's get a nanny for a month and just go, I don't know, explore a Buddhist temple in Thailand and, you know, have a week of like non-speaking meditation or something.
Oh my God.
Like,
try to do kids with that. That's
no. It doesn't work. And, you know, I want to try and experience all sorts of stuff. And it's difficult when you have children. And I've always had that view, whether I was, you know, a Christian or not. I've always kind of seen kids that way.
Okay. So that's not something that's really changed for you.
Nah.
Okay. Well, this isn't anything I haven't already known, guys. Don't worry about me. It's okay. I'm not going to like suddenly freak out and be like, oh my God, I found out that Holy Kool-Aid isn't going to have babies with me and we're breaking up on live stream. So,
well, again, it's one of those things where like I would eventually like to, but it's not something that like I've been in this huge rush to, you know, oh my gosh, I have to have them like right this moment because, you know, now I'm in my 20s, now I'm in my 30s. It's no, like as long as it's within the time that my biological clock allows, you know, I'm fine with it.
Right. Okay. Could you ever now date a religious person? Is that too like
how religious?
I don't know what like
I'll tell you where my
Okay,
line is.
where's
I'll tell you
your
where my
line?
line is. So I dated this girl in college who was a cultural Catholic, and we had good chemistry.
Was this while you were a
And
Christian or
this was, I think I was kind of like, I actually I started dating her when I was like on the fence about religion, kind of starting to come out as an atheist, but I wasn't actually like, I hadn't entered my post deconversion depression phase. I hadn't entered my angry atheist, I've been lied to phase. I hadn't gotten through that and kind of mellowed out yet. And so I was sort of just on the fence, started dating her. She was kind of religious. She sort of became less religious and was more of like a, I don't know, cultural Catholic, deist, believed in God, didn't really care, didn't really give a crap. Still fairly skeptical about most things, psychics and what have you. And we actually got along really well. And we wound up breaking up for other reasons. And then she moved off, I moved off, and we reconnected after my divorce. And at that point, I was in my angry atheist phase. And she was in her, I'm still cultural Catholic, but kind of don't really give a shit, like more of an apatheist phase. And we reconnected. We didn't date again ever after that, but like we hit it off still. And she was like, she made a joke about what if actually the Westbrook Baptist Church has it wrong and God hates figs. And because there's a story in the Bible where Jesus curses a fig tree, and so it's not about LGBT stuff. They just got a letter wrong. And, you know, so she was able to kind of laugh, and she's, you know, pro LGBT, and she's not, you know, like bigoted in any way. And I was like, okay, cool. Like that, I could have a relationship like that where someone like maybe kind of believes it, maybe thinks that there's some truth to it. But if someone was very religious, or they were like dogmatically like the earth is 6,000 years old, young earth creationist, and we're not taking our kids to the doctor, instead we're opting for faith healing, I could never do that. Like I could never, ever, like I'm past the point where like that's going to fly. I'm going to teach my kids history. I'm going to teach them science. I'm going to teach them about how the world works. I'm going to teach them that stem cells are fantastic and we should research on them and not ban them because that's not a soul in a petri dish. That if you get pregnant, you know, and you're not ready to have a kid, it's okay to get an abortion, especially early on before, like you want the sooner the better before, you know, don't do what the, I'm not going to go off on a whole rant on this, but like there's so many things that are, I've changed my perspective on, that it's really hard when you're a biblical literalist to, it's hard to be anything but politically conservative in these areas. You can be a liberal Christian, but it's rare that you're a liberal progressive Christian and also see the Bible as the literal historical word of God, and every single word is to be taken literally, in your full-blown young earth creationist. It's very difficult to do both of those things. And so for me, I think just in terms of where I stand on science and history and politics and stuff, it would be really hard to date someone who is that Christian. As far as other religions, again, like if someone was an incredibly moderate, liberal, progressive Muslim and just didn't really give a shit about it and stuff, there would still possibly be difficulties when it comes to family. And this goes for the Christians as well. Differences of, hey, I'm going to bring an atheist home. And like,
yeah,
you know,
no, like you can't really ignore that. Like, it runs pretty deep.
And that's more like, would they date me? You know, because that's a hurdle as well.
Yeah.
But and I'm pretty vocal about my criticisms of religion, so that would definitely be a hurdle for them too. But yeah, it depends on how religious they are. If someone's kind of like a Zen Buddhist and they, you know, they're pretty liberal. A lot of Buddhists are atheists anyways, so it's like, but they could be like spiritual or something, and it's like, all right.
Yeah. No, I have the same kind of thing. Well, like I've tried dating religious people, and I know that works for some people. In the future, I'd love to have on a couple with opposing faiths and views. That would be really interesting because I know it can work. But I have found that I get too vocal. And so it's more like I'm the problem. And like, I'll admit that. And, but I do worry about like if I was still dating like religious people from my past, I worried what would happen, you know, when we end up having children and how we're going to live our life as partners and things. So yeah, I also want to thank Mathew for your super chat, and we're gonna save your question as well. How long after becoming an atheist did it take for you to free yourself of the baggage around relationships / sex? Yeah, we can get to that as well.
You want to just take that one right now because it just disappeared and I'm going to forget it.
Sure. I'm just gonna put baggage. I will remember.
Okay.
Do this on the fly. Okay, so the next thing is spirituality differences. Oh wait, I want to go back because there was more to our last kind of subtopic that I wanted to bring up.
Okay.
When you were Christian, could you have dated someone with a different religion? Do you think that would have worked? Or
so there's a notion within Christianity of like Christians are told not to date someone who is of a different faith. And first it was a command given to the Jews when they entered Canaan. They were supposed to wipe out and slaughter everyone in the land so that they didn't interbreed with them or like intermix and marry with them. Because if you marry someone who worships Baal and has an idol to it, then your kids might worship and go astray and like, you know, follow that God. And God is a jealous God, apparently. Right. So with that in mind, as a Christian, I was like, okay, so you're not supposed to marry people of different religion. And then you have this notion of like being unevenly yoked where it's...
Oh, you've talked to me about that. And I was like, what is unevenly yoked?
If you're a Christian, it makes perfect sense. I was kind of shocked like when you'd never heard that because I forget like you weren't raised under like the all-inclusive, like the all-encompassing Bible, you know, Christian perspective. But this notion, it comes from, obviously the Bible was written in a time when everyone just thought about livestock and like 99.5% of the population was agrarian. And the analogy is if you have like one ox that is much bigger than the other one, then the yoke that you know, because you put the yoke on them to like plow your field, and the yoke will be uneven. And so they're going to constantly be going like to the left or to the right, and you're not going to get like a straight line in your field. And so it's like, and the burden is going to be unevenly on one of them as opposed to the other. And so this idea is that if you are a Christian and someone else is not, then you're unevenly yoked and you're going to be carrying the brunt of the load of like raising the children to be religious and to follow God and to make sure that you have, you know, that the Lord is dwelling in your house and that you're not, you know, going astray. And so it's going to be more difficult than if you have someone who's like a Christian and a Christian who are a couple. And so I think I had that mindset very heavily ingrained in me. But at the same time, like I would meet people who weren't super religious, even when I was, you know, in like junior high and high school, who I think one of the probably maybe the second girl that I ever had a crush on, she would like go to youth group sometimes, but she was very much like not religious. And then in high school, I met people like, I think the first girl that I made out with was like atheist.
Oh my God.
And it was like, these people seemed like nice, decent, good people, but they just, well, except for the first girl, she ripped my heart out. She was kind of a terrible, nasty human being, but
she was probably 12. So
yeah, she was.
Maybe
she was 12.
Need to let that hate go.
Hey, it was junior high, man.
Yeah. Junior high girls are brutal.
Those were rough times.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah.
I catch you off guard?
I forget where I was going with that. So as far as like being able to date someone who is not religious, I think when I was a Christian, I thought that that's what I had to do was date a Christian, but it was more a matter of as long as I married a Christian, it would be fine. But if I happened to have like, oh no, I went on a date with someone and maybe I could win them over to Jesus and see like they seem like a good person. I still like have feelings that I can't control that are for this person. I still think that this person is like gorgeous or attractive.
And you can save them.
And, you know, maybe I can win them over for Jesus. And yeah.
Okay. Spirituality differences now. So not necessarily religious, but I love this because I know you're like how you feel about woo and you debunk psychics kind of for a living. So could you date someone who's spiritual? And let's get a little personal. How do you feel about my trickles of spirituality in the relationship? I'm not a very spiritual person, but when it comes to spirituality, I am definitely more open to it than you are.
It depends on how we define spirituality, because I feel like that word it's kind of a landmine, because you have in the atheist community, you hear spiritual, you think spirit, you think soul, you think ghosts, and you're like, that's hogwash. Like, obviously I'm not into it. But when the average person says, I saw the Grand Canyon and it was a spiritual experience.
Okay.
That's not what they mean. They mean it's like, hey, when I see a sunset, it can bring me to tears. And I think like that's the type of thing in life that is we call it a spiritual experience. It's an emotional experience. It's a deep moving experience. It's connecting with nature and the world around you and the people around you and caring for, and like you can watch a movie where you relate to the characters and it brings you to tears, and and it's almost like life altering and life changing. And I think when I hear that, I'm like, sure, spirituality sounds great. Why do we call it spirituality though? Like, why? Like, we need a better word, we need better terminology, but people kind of get it. They kind of understand it when you say spiritual experience. Yeah. When you start talking about like psychics or woo or the paranormal, tarot cards, palm reading, stuff like that, then I start to kind of roll my eyes. And if I'm dating someone who is like super into that stuff and like believes it all hook, line, and sinker, I start to lose some of my respect for their intellect, because I think like there's so many ways to like test it and disprove it. And I think just buying into it wholeheartedly, gullibly, is a really, really unhealthy way to approach the world. And especially people who are not willing to question it or not willing to doubt. It's one thing to kind of say, I don't know, I'm open-minded to it. Like, we'll see. Let's figure it out together. Then it's like, cool, go for it. And I think like with you talk about things like astrology, and like, that like the placement of stars at the time of your birth, it's like balls of gas burning billions of miles away, not to quote the Lion King, but like, that doesn't like affect people's personalities in mass. But at the same time, like, you enjoy it as kind of a fun, like, oh, hey, like this is kind of fun and interesting, and like reading the astrology records, reports, what do they call them?
Horoscopes.
Yeah,
it's kind of my party trick. When people tell me like their sign, I can just tell them about their personality.
But
Barnum, but I know that I know what I'm doing when I'm doing it.
Their Barnum statements, like rainbow ruse, like all these tricks.
But
it's
still like fun. Like it's fun to believe, babe. And that's like one thing that I think we fundamentally disagree on, is that like, I think, well, you're more exposed to the harm that this kind of thinking, you're more boots on the ground. Like you see the harm that it causes. I am a little bit more in La La Land, where I'm like, it's like Santa Claus. Like, what's the harm?
Well, but here's the thing, is like, even the people who are very skeptical, who debunk this stuff, with you go to like PsyCon or something, and you have Skeptical Inquiry, and you have all these people who go and they'll like test and debunk psychics and stuff. And even then, they're, if it's, hey, someone at a birthday party did a palm reading or something, someone like Ray Hyman, who I had on my show, he's a psychologist. He worked with both the CIA and the Department of Defense to test psychics during the Cold War to see if there was anything to it. And he used to be a palm reader and then became a skeptic and, debunked a lot of stuff. But even someone like that, like he's like, hey, it could still be kind of a fun party trick, as long as you're not like conning people and using it in the same way that like Darren Brown will use some of these tricks in his magic tricks. But the difference is that like a magician will always tell you that you're being lied to. That you're being fooled. They're an honest liar. And a psychic and a con artist will not. And so that's where I think that a lot of the harm comes from, is that they're not disclosing to you that it's a lie, but it's a fun lie and it's a trick afterwards or beforehand. They're they're perpetuating it and potentially manipulating or using you. I think that's where it crosses the line from there's fun, there's ignorant, and then there's harmful. And once they start, conning you and stuff and trying to use you or, direct police resources because they think that they know where the body's hidden or something.
That's upsetting. We have about 10 minutes left, about 9 minutes left. I want to get to the super chats.
We have one more question. Do we want to do that and then
if we'll get back to it if we have time, but I really want to make sure that we get to those super chats because I appreciate y'all so much. What do you think it would be like if we met when you were still a Christian? Would you have dated me? Probably not.
While I was still a Christian, it's not so much would I have dated you as would you have dated me?
Nope.
Because I don't know if I've shown you too many pictures. I was a dorky kid. Oh, I still am dorky. But I was so socially awkward, painfully, miserably socially awkward.
I've always kind of liked dorky boys, though.
Yes, but there's a part of me that when I was in high school, I was a homeschooled kid, ultra religious conservative kid, grew up overseas, missionary kid, had no I was not in touch with my own culture, my own, knowledge of how people interact, how you date, how you have relationships. I didn't know jack about sex or about women and how they think and stuff. And I went from the ultra conservative, you have to treat all women like they're your sisters, and then you court one that's the one that God has given, that's chosen for you, and then you get married. And I went from that to, I'm frustrated with how awkward I am around girls, and so I'm going to try to figure out how to talk to women. And the only advice that there was on the internet, that's before all of this secular advice, before shows like this, before there was YouTube, before there was a whole lot of stuff on the internet. And it was the stuff that you would find was pickup artists. And it was very degrading to women. It was women don't really want to have sex. You have to trick them into coming home with you. And so I went from absolutely no knowledge of what a healthy relationship looks like, except for, oh, hey, it's you treat everyone like they're your sisters, and women don't want sex and they're not interested in relationships and stuff, that you just have to court them and be a good Christian man, to the opposite of that was, if you want to get with a woman, then you have to use all of these psychological type of tricks, which can be so toxic. And it sees women as objects. It treats women not like a respectful partner who you actually love and you cherish and you build on something together and you create something special. But I went through those phases and eventually kind of came out the other side where it's hey, women can be equal partners. You can love each other and respect each other. You can cherish each other. They like sex too. And you can have open conversations, and they appreciate honesty, and nice guys don't finish last. Technically they finish last in the bedroom if they're a nice guy, but but that whole mindset, if you had met me and started dating me when I was on either of those phases, I think you would have found me either someone who didn't have the guts to even so much as talk to you, or someone who was insufferable.
I probably would have. I like to imagine if we met in high school, I would be because I was kind of emo goth, weirdo, and you were this good awkward Christian boy. But I was always attracted to smart boys. But I never dated the smart boys because they were a little bit scary because they could actually break my heart. So I dated douchebags. But anyway, I would have I also was in a free thinkers and non-believers group. I was pretty vocal. I had a Christian phase very shortly, but after that I went back to angry atheist. And so I probably would have argued with you a lot, and then we would have accidentally fallen in love, and then I would have corrupted him. Or you would have brought me to Jesus.
Well, hey, at least this way, my parents can't be mad at you for making me an atheist. Right. Because I can be hey, I was already an atheist, and then I found this person who, even though she's an atheist, she's such a good person. And my parents are whoa, she must secretly love Jesus.
I know. I say, yeah. Oh, but you get your morality from God, whether you know it or not.
Yeah.
So, Mathew had asked, like, how long? I'm paraphrasing because the super chats go away, but I remember how long, like, does it take to work through that, like, religious baggage that comes with, like, the uncomfortableness with women and sex? How to work through that? How long does it take? When are you still working through it? If that's something you're comfortable with sharing.
Yeah, the short answer is, I'm absolutely still working through it. The long, more complicated answer is, I think it really depends on how much effort you're willing to put into it. Because at first, I didn't think that I had any kind of problem when it came to the way that I viewed relationships. Because, step one is realizing, hey, this isn't necessarily the most healthy way to look at things. And hey, I have a lot of baggage. And hey, my religious upbringing has left a lot of perspectives in my mind that I don't think are beneficial to relationships. When you realize that, like, if you can actually kind of get to that breakthrough moment, then it's like a bunch of dominoes. And then it's just a matter of how much are you willing to stare your demons in the face and either learn to accept the things you can't change about your past, or to fix the things that need fixing. And when it comes to relationships, for me, I first had to kind of approach sex, and the way that I looked at sex, the way that I looked at dating, the way that I looked at conversations, the way that I looked at a partner and what does a healthy relationship look like? What does an abusive relationship look like? And there are things that you can find on the internet in terms of, like, there's psychologists and stuff who talk about this stuff at length. There are a lot more shows now that talk about relationships and healthy relationships that aren't just about, like, how to get a girl interested in you and, like, how to these 10 secret mind tricks that will, like, have every girl wanting you. It's there are resources unlike those that can really help you to grow. So there's a lot more out there now. But also, like, if you're willing to put yourself out there, meet people platonically and talk with people of the opposite sex, get to know them, what they think about how, what they're like, not just like Christian conservative girls, but girls who, like, are a little bit more comfortable in their own skin and in their own bodies and more independent, who've worked through this stuff, people who are a little more emotionally mature. Talk to older people because they tend to have figured out a lot more stuff. It's like, you don't have to date someone who's like 40, 50, 60, but, like, if you can find someone who's, like, not religious, who has a little bit more of a grasp on emotional intelligence, who's older, talk with them.
Talk to Dr. Daryl Ray.
Yeah, Daryl Ray has a lot of good stuff on relationships. Read books on the topic, and be willing to date too. Like, don't be afraid of Tinder. Don't be afraid of OkCupid or dating sites or something, or eHarmony or whatever. Like, just or find if there's, like, a local speed dating in your area. Go and just, like, sit down with someone. There's nothing shameful in that. Like, you're just meeting another human being, but don't see them as just like, oh, this is like an online date, or oh, this is just like, this person's just like a meat sack or whatever. It's like, no, like, this is a human being with feelings and thoughts and emotions. You might connect with them, you might not. If you don't, that's okay. At the small price of a dinner, you've literally gotten to sit and have someone's attention for an hour to learn about the mindset and how it works of
You're shaking the table.
the mind and how it works of someone who is, someone you potentially are sexually interested in. Hey, I went from the girls in my high school wouldn't so much as, like, throw a soda on me if I was, like, on fire, to I could land a date with someone who maybe wasn't, like, a 10 out of 10 in terms of what I was attracted to, but I got a date. And so I'd sit down, I'd talk with someone, I'd get to know them, I'd get to try out jokes and see what worked and what didn't, and see what things made it awkward and what things worked. And
look at you now, dating a 10 out of 10 in every way.
In every way but humility.
I would add, don't be afraid of rejection too. It happens to everyone. It sucks all the time. It gets a little bit easier to tolerate, but, like, you gotta get used to it.
Yeah.
You just have to, or you're not gonna grow. Like, everyone gets rejected.
And here's the thing. Like, you can take it slow at first and see, like, for example, if you're sitting talking to someone and, and you kind of, like, do, like, a friendly touch, do they kind of freeze up? Do they shy away? Do they kind of lean into it and get a little affectionate? And then it's like, if they're leaning into it and they're into it, you know, you might
don't go around touching like everyone.
I'm not saying touch everyone, but like if you're on a date and like you feel like they've been flirting with you or something, like see how they respond. Don't go straight for like, hey, I'm gonna grope the boobs, the boobage. Like you know, like know the boundaries of like take small steps, like incremental is my point. And gauge feedback and talk to people. Like people are so afraid of talking to people, are so afraid of asking questions. Like since when is it like it's like, oh, it'll kill the mood if I ask, may I kiss you? It's like,
oh, we talked about that with Jenna.
And it's like, yeah, you can have a time where you kind of lean in, you close your eyes, but then it's like, okay, it's going to be even more awkward if they aren't into it at that moment. Maybe they would be later in the date or maybe on the second or third date, but like, is it less sexy that you asked and they were like, oh, I'm good right now, but like I kind of like you, I kind of want to get to know you more first. Okay, well then you just get to know them a little bit more first, and then you have a better solid relationship base, as opposed to like, you know, oh well, I didn't ask for consent and I just like leaned in and she like was like, whoa, what the heck are you doing? That's probably going to be a bigger strikeout than if you just been like, hey.
Right.
I don't know. I'm all for
No, I like this.
Conversation.
Dating advice with Holy Kool-Aid. Yeah. So, okay, we are at the hour. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. I know this is definitely different than the normal content that Holy Kool-Aid does, but you know, the pickup line is where we have candid conversations and take a break from the more academic stuff, and talk about, you know, atheists are like people too who like get horny and get in relationships and get their hearts broken. So that's what we do here on the pickup line. Get horny and break each other's hearts.
Well, I think one thing I love about you guys' show is you're able to really like candidly discuss relationships, sex, funny stories, heartbreaking stories, you know, like sad stories, everything in between. And it's so healthy to have these conversations because for so much of my life, this was taboo. Talking about sex was not something you did in polite conversations. It certainly wasn't something that you blasted all over the internet, talking about everything from like kinks and fetishes to like, what is a healthy way to treat an individual and to treat them with respect and autonomy. And so I'm really glad that you and Ethan do this show, and you guys actually have an amazing dynamic. So I'm going to get off of this episode and you guys can get back to your normal swing of things. But everyone who is tuning in from my show, hit that subscribe button and check them out next week, because I really enjoy the show. It always feels like fun and laid back.
Thank you. And thank you for joining me. So I just need to do some of the housekeeping that Ethan normally does. So pardon me for just a moment. Thank you so much to our patrons. Our pastries. Thank you to our patrons: Cindy PLAZA, Kenneth, Leonard, Skye, JumpandShoot, Oz, P, Secular Rarity, Philip, Leitch, Kaitlyn Beyond, Toast, Richard Gilliver, Sunset Sarge, The Blazing Wizard Pope, Ameet, Mathew. And The Perspective is a show where we tackle supernatural and paranormal claims at the beginning. Sorry. Yeah, okay. I'm reading this off of a message that Ethan sent me. Sorry. The Perspective is a show where we tackle supernatural and paranormal claims beginning at 7 p.m. Central. This week will be hosted by David Warnock and Laura Maggie. Okay. Yeah. And then he says, don't have to announce it like that, but there's the gist. Okay. I tried to do it verbatim and I screwed up. Thank you so much for everyone, to everyone who tuned in, and to the super chats. We will see you next week. Ethan and I will be together back to our normal locations. And if you want to support their show, then go subscribe on Patreon. On Patreon. All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye. Ethan has